Hello friends, it's Kristie Marcotte. Jaded Blossom has a brand new release and it's all about outdoors and fishing. The release includes 2 new Gnome add-on sets plus a Build-A-Booth add-on set along with lots of fun stamps, dies, and stencils. So let me show you everything that's included in the August 2023 release. The first item is a Gnome Die add-on set. This is Sign. This is the freebie you'll receive if you order at least $60 worth of product, and one item has to be from the new release. The freebie is only available for a limited time and while supplies last. The new Sign add-on set is perfect for adding some of the smaller sentiments. Here's a look at one of the new stamp sets, Bait Shop. The bottom 3 rows of sentiments will all fit on the new Sign die. The larger sentiments are designed to fit on the sign of the Build-A-Booth die set. Of course, you can use all of them without the 2 dies. The next stamp set is called Happy Trails Gnome. There's stamps and coordinating outline dies. Lots of really fun outdoor sentiments. It includes Hiking with My Gnomies, I'm Lost Without You, Adventure Squad, You Make Life an Adventure, The Great Outdoors, Happy Birthday, Cheers to Many More Adventures, Happy Trails Gnomie, and several others. The next sentiment set is called Best Fishes. There's the stamps and coordinating outline dies. Some of the sentiments are Great things come to those who bait, Fishing you a great birthday, Best fishes, You have my heart, hook, line, and sinker, You're a great catch, and several other fun sentiments. One of the new Gnome add-on sets is called Outdoor, and this is such a fun set. There's one image on this set that makes it my favorite, and I may have requested it. It's the camera. I have been a shutterbug most of my life. I love taking pictures, so I was really excited when I saw they included the camera image. There's lots of other fun outdoor images as well, including new hiking boots, there's a map, a lantern, binoculars, and so many other fun images. There's another new Gnome add-on set. This one's called Fishing. There's a new hat, which is really cute, a fishing net, some fish, a tackle box, lures, a bobber, a fishing pole. It's another really cute Gnome add-on set. Here's a look at the new fishing add-on set for their Build-A-Booth dies. There are 2 new garland pieces, one with lures and bobbers and the other with fish. There's also a larger lure, larger bobber, and 3 words, fish, bait, and tackle. The final item included in the release is a fish stencil. It's a single stencil, and I love the design with all the schools of fish. There's one other item that's not part of the release, but it is new to Jaded Blossom shop. They now carry a skin tone paper pad. This is by P13, and it's perfect to use with Jaded Blossom's Gnome dies. I've been using it for over a year. It is available at scrapbook.com, but it sells out sometimes in less than an hour after they restock it. Jaded Blossom was able to get their hands on a bunch of them, and they now stock them in their store. So if you are interested, I do have a link in the description box. The paper pad is 4 by 6 inches in size, includes 24 double-sided sheets, and I believe there's a total of 6 skin tones included in the paper pad, and I love that on the back side of the cover sheet is another skin tone. And it's a nice heavyweight cardstock. The pattern paper I'll be using on several of my cards today is a retired collection from Bella Boulevard called Let's Go on an Adventure. If I can find a link to the collection, I will add it in the description box. For card design number 1, I selected this lovely green and blue plaid paper for the background. I'm adding a wide strip of pattern paper with mountains and trees. Along the edge of the pattern paper, I'll put a Love from Lizzie peel off. This is the black color in the pinstripe style. I'm using the medium width and putting it along the edge of the tree and mountain pattern paper. I'll wrap the ends around the back, layer this piece on some black cardstock, put ATG tape on the back, and add my card front onto a card base. All of my cards in this video are American Standard A2 size, 4¼ inches by 5½ inches. And later on in the video, I do have a bonus project, but it's not a card. This card will be featuring one of the boy gnomes. Using some white cardstock, I cut out the legs and also the background of the gnome. I'll start by assembling the new fishing hat. Use some craft cardstock for the hat and green cardstock for the brim. Now I'll start working on the gnome. Since the gnome will have the new legs, I'll first cut off the little leg stubs on the outline piece. Then I'll attach the beard. The outline pieces will be completely covered up. They're really there for a guideline. You can use whatever color you want. I prefer to use white cardstock. The new hat is shorter than the hat on the outline piece, so I'll use my scissors to trim off that extra portion. I'll set that aside for now and start working on the legs. I use white cardstock for the outline. I have some light brown cardstock for the boots, and for the soles of the boots, I'm using some dark gray cardstock, almost a black color. Most of the cardstock I use for the gnomes and other die cut pieces are scraps of cardstock I have on hand. I have a large set of drawers where I keep all of the scrap pieces of cardstock. For the legs or the pants, I use a light blue cardstock. The hiking boots have some teeny tiny die cut pieces, and that's for the laces. There are 2 for each boot. For most of the die cuts, I'm using a pair of reverse tweezers to hold them, but for the ties of the boots, I am using an embellishment wand to pick those up since they are teeny tiny. I have just one final piece to add to the legs. Then I'll set those aside and start assembling the compass. I use some dark gray cardstock for the background piece, some off-white cardstock for the face of the compass. I use some satin silver mirror cardstock for the needle and the little hook of the compass, and black cardstock for the very center piece. Once I have the compass assembled, I'll set it aside, and I'll pull out the legs and also the fishing hat. I want to add just a little extra ink to the edge of the 2 pieces. I'm using Distress Oxide ink. This is the Vintage Photo Color. I pulled out my mini stencil mat so I could add ink to the top of the hat and also the edge of the boots. If this gnome is out and about exploring a trail, I'm pretty sure his boots and hat wouldn't be clean. Once I'm finished with that, I'll start assembling the rest of the gnome. I'll first add the hat. You can see on the back side there's some writing. This is definitely old cardstock. Years ago, I did traditional scrapbooking, and I always typed out the journaling. I may have misspelled a word, but decided to keep the cardstock since it's thick enough and the other side was still usable. After the hat, I'll add the mustache, then the nose, and I will pop up the nose using some thin foam dimension. Now I'll attach the gnome onto the legs, and he's just sitting outside doing the splits. I first thought about cutting the legs in half so the gnome could be standing, but changed my mind for this card. I will have a standing gnome on another card later on in the video. I'll add glue on the back side of the beard before attaching the gnome onto the legs. Next, I'll attach his hands to the compass. I'll flip it over, put foam dimension on the back, remove the release paper, and adhere the compass in front of the gnome. So now he's holding a giant compass. Hopefully he won't get lost in the woods. Since the background of the card is fairly busy, I'll be adding the gnome onto a large circle die cut. I cut out one from white cardstock and the layer piece from some dark blue cardstock. I'll adhere the 2 pieces together, put glue on the back, and add the circle onto my card. Next, I'll put foam dimension on the back of the gnome, remove the release paper, and add my gnome onto the circle. I always like to have some cards on hand that are nice and flat and don't have a lot of extra dimension. That never seems to happen with my gnome cards. I love adding lots and lots of dimension. For a sentiment, I've already stamped and cut it out using the outline dies. This is Happy Birthday, Cheers to Many More Adventures. I stamped it on some craft cardstock, and using the outline die, I cut out a second piece from some dark blue cardstock. I'll glue the two pieces together, creating a dark blue drop shadow underneath the sentiment. Then I'll add thin foam dimension on the back and adhere it underneath the gnome. Next, I'll add a small banner in the upper left-hand corner. I cut it out from the same dark blue cardstock. I first cut a fishtail on the bottom. On the right side, I cut it in slightly at an angle, flipped it over, and did the same thing on the other side. And I'll adhere it in place using some glue. Using a white gel pen, I'll add some highlights to the gnome, the hat, and also the compass. Then for a final finishing touch, I'm using some older Doodlebug shape sprinkles, adding a little leafy branch onto his hat, and I'll also add 3 small light blue stars around the gnome. So there is my finished card, and I did make 2 using this design. I love how this card turned out. The gnome is so cute, sitting there doing the splits in his hiking boots. For card design number 2, I will be using a card sketch for inspiration. This is from OWH. It's number 161. And I think this is the only card sketch I'm using in the video. I selected this fun tree slice pattern paper for the background. And for the narrow strip going across the card, I have a green tone-on-tone pattern with small trees. I'll layer both pieces on some dark brown cardstock. Along the edge of the tree pattern paper, I'm adding a Love from Lizzie peel-off. This is the brown mirror color in the pinstripe style. I'll put ATG tape on the back and add my card front onto a card base, leaving 1/8 of an inch of the white card base showing. Then I'll add the tree strip toward the bottom of the card. Using Jaded Blossoms stitched oval dies, I cut out the pattern paper piece that has a bunch of outdoor sentiments. You won't really be able to see them since I will be covering it up with a gnome. I'll layer that piece on a dark brown oval die cut. Before adhering the oval to the card, I will add a scrap cardstock piece on the back side, just on the top portion. And that'll help keep it nice and level. I've already assembled most of the gnome. I used some dark blue grid pattern paper for his hat, and this is from a Bella Boulevard collection. He'll be holding an axe, and there'll be a stack of wood on his right side. I stamped the sentiment Happy Trails on the new sign die cut piece. I used craft cardstock for the sign and dark brown cardstock for the back piece that has the little strings to hang the sign. Next, I'll assemble the stack of wood. I used 2 different shades of brown cardstock for the wood, a slightly lighter color for the very ends of the stack. There's 1 separate log, so you could have an individual log. I'm adding it on top for a little extra detail, and I have the 3 ends to adhere. After assembling the stack, I'll add a little extra ink using the same Vintage Photo Distress Oxide ink color. I was first trying to use the ink left over on the brush, but I did need to pull out the ink pad. When I'm finished with that, I'll put glue on the back and adhere the stack of wood on the right side of the oval. Next, I'll add the gnome. I do have foam dimension on the back. I'll remove the release paper and add my gnome at the bottom of the oval. For the axe, I used dark brown cardstock and also some silver pearlescent cardstock. I'll add his hands around the axe, put foam dimension on the back, remove the release paper, and now the gnome is holding the axe and he's already been busy chopping wood. All of the skin tone cardstock I used in this video is from the P13 paper pad. I love using a variety of different skin tones for my gnomes. One of my favorites to make is a blonde girl gnome since it reminds me of my daughter. Next, I'll add the sentiment sign. I'll put foam dimension on the back, remove the release paper, and adhere it in the upper right-hand corner. And I decided to put it at a slight angle. For a final finishing touch, I'm using a white gel pen, adding some highlights to the sign, the gnome, the axe, and also the stack of wood. For this card, I decided not to add any bling. So there is my finished card, and I did make 2 using this design. If I have enough of the same supplies, I love making duplicates of the same card. And it's nice to have extra gnome cards on hand. I have a lot of friends and family that love the gnomes. And I'll also sell some of my gnome cards in my Etsy shop. I get a lot of questions about how I prep my videos, so I thought I would show a quick behind the scenes. I recently picked up these containers. They're designed to put in drawers and you can stack them all up together. They are about 6 by 6 inches in size, and I love that an A2 size card fits perfectly. So when I'm making duplicates of the same card, I can pop in all those tiny die cut pieces and I don't have to worry about losing them. And if you are interested, I do have a link in the description box. They come in a set of 6 and I've purchased several sets. For card design number 3, the pattern paper is from Honeybee Stamps Vitamin C collection. I used Jaded Blossom's window card mat die to cut out this fun frame. I have double-sided adhesive tape on the back side. I'll remove the release paper and add the frame onto the background. This card will feature lots of die cut images from the Gnome fishing add-on set. For this set of cards, I did a ton of die cutting, especially since I made 2 of every card. I'll start by assembling the tackle box. I used 3 different shades of blue cardstock. Just glue all those pieces together. I love how most of Jaded Blossom's dies have the fun faux stitch detail. I used a darker blue cardstock for the handle and also the latches of the tackle box. Next, I'll assemble the fish. For the background of the fish and also the fin, I used some yellowish orange cardstock. For the main body of the fish, I have orange cardstock. There's the little opening of the eye. For the eye, you could use a black pen or put a small black piece of cardstock behind it. I'm using a Love from Lizzie peel-off. This is the black color in the mini circle style. I'll add the peel-off at the head of the fish. Put glue on the back of the orange body and adhere it in place. Next, I'll add the tiny little fin. Then I'll do the same thing for the next fish. I had planned on only showing the assembly of one of the images and having the rest already assembled, but it looks like I forgot to do the second fish. I know it looks like a lot of die cut pieces, but the end results are always worth it with Jaded Blossom sets. The peel-off I used is a vinyl finish, so it has a little bit of shine. And I think the shine adds just that little extra detail. Now I'll assemble one of the lures. The background, I used some silver pearlescent cardstock. I have a bright green cardstock for the larger feather piece and some teal cardstock for the single feather. For the thread that's wrapped around holding the feathers in place, I used some dark teal cardstock. I'm not into fishing, so please forgive me if I'm using the wrong terms for all of the items. It looks like I forgot to assemble the second lure, so I'll quickly pop that together. This set also includes the tiny bobber. I cut out the background piece from some white shimmer cardstock, and I use red cardstock for the bottom of the bobber. So this one's quick and simple to adhere together. The final piece to assemble is the net. I used 2 different shades of brown cardstock, the darker shade for the handle. Once I've assembled the net, I'll add the 3 fish inside the net. I'll put glue on the back side, add the first fish, so its little head is just popping out. The second fish will have the tail sticking out, and the third fish will have its head poking out. I'll add 1 fish at a time, then put more glue on the back so I can add the second fish. Want to make sure all 3 of the fish are inside the net. With all of the layers from the fish, it does add more dimension in the very center of the net, so it gives it a slight rounded look. After adding the final fish, I'll set that aside to dry. Now I'll start adding the image die cuts into the frame. I'll put the fishing hat down first. I'll put it in the lower right-hand corner. I'll also add one of the bobbers onto the hat. The tackle box will also go in the lower right-hand corner, but I will be popping it up with some foam dimension. I'll remove the release paper and adhere it in front of the hat. Next, I'll add the net full of fish. The image will go in the upper right-hand box. Put glue on the back and adhere it in place. And I have the handle of the net at a slight angle. The fishing lures and bobbers will go in the lower left-hand box. I will pop up all of the images with some foam dimension. The bobbers are fairly small, so I will need to cut one of the small squares in half. I'll add the 3 lures first. Then in between the lures, I'll add the 2 bobbers. For a sentiment, I've already stamped and cut this out. Wishing you a great birthday. Using the outline die, I cut out a second piece, and I'll adhere the 2 together so I have a brown drop shadow underneath the sentiment. Then I'll add thin foam dimension on the back and adhere it in the upper left-hand corner. I have both black and white foam dimension. With the darker brown background piece, I think the black foam dimension works better behind it. For embellishments, I'm using some leftover enamel dots from Pink and Main. I believe this sheet was included in one of their card kits from a couple years ago. I selected the light tan color, and I'll put 3 around the sentiment. They do have adhesive on the back, but I'm adding just a small drop of glue to make sure they stay in place. For a final finishing touch, I'll use a white gel pen, add a few highlights to the fish, the hat, the tackle box, and also the lures. So there is my finished card, and I did make 2 using this design. Now moving on to card design number 4, and this is my favorite card design. You can probably guess it'll be featuring the new camera image. Instead of using pattern paper for the background, I'll be ink blending. I'm using tumbled glass Distress Oxide ink for the top, and at the bottom I'm using Vintage Photo Distress Oxide ink. Instead of cleaning off the blue ink from the Stencil Mat, I'll just flip it around. Now I'll add the brown ink to the bottom. I know it looks like the top, but I'm doing it upside down. Since the blue ink is still wet, I don't want to get my fingerprints on it. I'm holding the paper in place with a Post-it note. Once I finish with the background, I'll add a little extra detail in the dirt area using the same Vintage Photo ink, pressing some of it on an acrylic block. I'll spritz it with water. I'll cover up the sky area of the background. Don't want to splatter any brown ink in the sky. Then I'll lightly tap my paintbrush to add brown splatter to the dirt area on the background. I'll set that aside to dry since some of that ink is still wet, and I'll start working on some of the die cut images. I'm using a few previously released Gnome add-on sets. From the spring set, I'm using the hat. From the weather set, I'm using the sun, the cloud, and also the rain boots. And from the Easter set number 2, I'm using the tulip image. I'll first adhere the sun. There's the background piece and the circle center. Now I'll work on the tulip. I use some dark green cardstock for the background and some pretty pink cardstock for the main flower portion, and also the single petal that goes in front for that little extra detail. The only new item featured on this card will be the camera, and I couldn't resist making a pink camera. I used a bright pink cardstock for the main body of the camera. For a couple other areas on the camera, I'm using some lighter pink cardstock. For the rim of the lens, I use black cardstock. And for the glass of the lens, I use some iridescent vellum. For the teeny tiny piece on the left side of the camera, I decided that's the shutter trigger, and I cut that out from some white shimmer cardstock. Once the camera's assembled, I'll add the gnome's hands. And once you see the size comparison with the gnome, you'll realize this is a really large camera. I'm not sure I could walk around taking pictures with a camera that large. And my big camera isn't exactly light. Once the hands are attached, I'll flip over this piece, put foam dimension on the back. I'll set that all aside for now. My background piece is all dry. I'll flip it over, put ATG tape on the back, and add my card front onto a card base. Now I'll start assembling the scene. I'm adding the sun in the upper left-hand corner with just part of it hanging off the edge. I'll put one of the clouds in the upper right-hand corner, also having some of it hang off the edge. I'll place an acrylic block on top for some added weight while the glue dries. While I wait on those pieces, I'll finish assembling the gnome. I have most of her already assembled. She's wearing the rain boots, and instead of having her doing the splits, I'm cutting the leg portion in half. and I'll glue the legs on the back side, and this is how you can make the gnome stand. To help get the legs even, I'm lining them up on my craft mat, then I'll place the gnome's body on top. Now I'll remove the release paper on the back of the camera and add it in front of the gnome. So there's my little gnome girl holding a giant pink camera. Next I'll remove the acrylic blocks, flip over this panel, use my scissors to trim off the extra cloud and sun portion. I'll add another cloud in front of the sun, but I'll only have about half of it on the card. I will pop it up using foam dimension, then I'll flip over the card, use my scissors to trim off the extra. Now it's time to create a beautiful pink tulip field. One of my favorite places to visit every spring are the tulip fields in Skagit Valley in Western Washington. I try to go every single year. There's always a beautiful garden with a variety of different flowers, but my favorite area is to walk out to the fields and see thousands and thousands of flowers. And they have rows and rows planted with the same type of tulip. The pink tulips are my favorite, but I also love the orange tulips. And orange is not my favorite color, but it's beautiful for a tulip. For my card, I'm creating a field of pink tulips. I'll adhere the first row down using some glue. For the second row of tulips, I am popping it up with some foam dimension. I'm only adding the foam dimension on the back of the flower. For the stem and the leaves, I'll adhere it down with some glue. For the second row, I'll put 3 flowers on the left side and 3 on the right, staggering them slightly. I'm not adding any tulips in the center since I want an area for my gnome to stand. If you've ever been to the tulip fields, one of the rules is you're not allowed to walk between the rows since you can crush the bulbs. But you are allowed to stand at the end of the row, and that's what this little gnome will be doing. For the final row of tulips, I'll add more foam dimension on the back, this time some slightly thicker foam dimension. The very end of the stems will go off the edge of the card. And once the glue dries, I'll flip over the card to trim off the extras. I cut out so many tulips, I did end up with 1 extra. Now I'll add the gnome, and I'm using some even thicker foam dimension. I'll first place the gnome on the card to check where I need to add the foam dimension. The right and left side of her skirt and hair sit in front of the tulips, so I don't want to use the really thick foam dimension there. I will add the thicker foam dimension behind her boots, her legs, her hat, and the very center of her body. After adding all those foam pieces, I'll place the gnome on the card again, just checking any areas that I need to add more foam. And I decided to add some small pieces on the right and left side of the brim of her hat. The thick foam dimension is left over from a Spellbinders card kit. I prefer using thin foam dimension, but this card needed the thicker foam with all of the different layers. I'll remove the release paper and add my little girl gnome in front of the tulips. And if you haven't figured it out yet, this gnome is me, happily out in the tulip fields taking pictures. I could spend hours and hours out in the tulip fields, and I have before. Rain or shine, it doesn't matter. This year it was all rain. Before adhering the gnome, I did flip over the card to trim off the extra stems of the tulips. For a little embellishment on the hat, I am adding a small pink flower, and this die is from the Garden Gnome add-on set. In the center of the flower, I did add a small peel-off. So there is my finished card, and I did make 2 using this design. Almost forgot to add a little bit of sparkle to the center of the sun using a clear glitter brush. I love this design so much, I decided to make a larger project. It's not a card, this will be wall art in my craft room. I created the same scene, lots more tulips. It's on a 9 by 6 inch panel. I spent hours cutting out pretty pink tulips. On the larger panel, I decided to have 1 tulip popping up just a little bit higher than the others, since there's always that one rebel flower in the tulip field. Many times it's a completely different color, but I really wanted to stick with the pink tulips. As soon as I find the perfect frame, I'll be hanging it in my craft room. Now moving on to card design number 5. I'll be using the new fish stencil on a booth die cut. And I used a wood grain pattern paper for the booth. The ink color is Suede Shoes by Catherine Pooler. And I'm adding the fish images on just the one section of the booth, since all the other areas will be covered up with die cut images or sentiments. For the background of my card, I already did some ink blending. Instead of the brown at the bottom for dirt, I used some green ink for grass. I'll put glue on the back of the booth and adhere it in place. The booth die cuts are very large and they do take up most of an A2 size card. Now I'll start assembling one of the bunting pieces. It has the lures and some bobbers. I cut out the background piece from some craft cardstock. The lure and bobber piece on the Build-A-Boo set are slightly different than the Gnome fishing add-on set. The lure is about the same size, but the bobber's much larger. And the fishing Build-A-Boo set also includes a larger bobber and a larger lure image. So you'll have lots of variety. Once I've assembled all three of the lures, I'll add them onto the background bunting piece. I have one of the bobbers already assembled. I'll do the second one. Just add the red piece at the top, or maybe it's the bottom of the bobber. Then I'll add both of those onto the background bunting piece. At the top of the booth, I'll be adding the word tackle. I've already cut out the sign, and this is part of the original Build-A-Boo die set. I cut out the word tackle from some blue cardstock. I left all of the die cut pieces there, held them together with some tacky tape. Then I'll gently lift up all of the letter die cut pieces. Having the tacky tape on the front will keep them in the same position. I'll put glue on the back side, then add the tackle word onto the sign. Then I'll slowly peel up the tacky tape, leaving the sentiment in place. This is an easy way to keep your sentiment all together. Now I'll flip over the sign, add some thin foam dimension on the back, remove the release paper, and adhere the tackle sign at the top of the booth on the left side, and I'll adhere it at a slight angle. I also cut out some of the teeny tiny fish images. I'll put one on the right side of the word tackle and one on the left side. On the back of the bunting piece, I'll put foam dimension behind the very center lure and the two bobbers. Then I'll add glue behind the other areas and adhere it at the top of the booth. Part of one of the bows and one of the hooks of the lures do go off the edge of the card, but it's just a tiny bit. Next, I'll add a gnome in the lower left-hand corner, and I've already assembled him. He's holding the sign with the sentiment, "Have a really good day." I have foam dimension on the back. I'll remove the release paper and adhere them in place. I'm also adding a red tackle box in the lower right-hand corner. And just to save time on the video, I've already assembled it. I used two different colors of red cardstock and some silver pearlescent cardstock for the latches. For a little embellishment on his hat, I'll add one of the leaf pieces from a Doodlebug shape sprinkle set. And for a final finishing touch, I'll use a white gel pen, add highlights to the sign, the lures, the gnome, and also the tackle box. So there is my finished card, and I did make two using this design. On the first card, when I stenciled the fish on the booth, I had them more in the center, and most of that area was covered up with the gnome and the tackle box. So when I did the second card, I made sure to place it in the upper right-hand corner of the booth front. Now moving on to card design number 6, and this is my final card design. I'm using this fun, whimsical tree pattern paper for the background. For the narrow strip going across the card, it's a smaller design of the tree slices. I'm layering everything on some black cardstock. I'll put ATG tape on the back and add my card front onto a card base, leaving 1/8 of an inch of the white card base showing. Then I'll add the wood slice piece toward the bottom of the card. In this video, I've already shown a lot of the gnome and image assembly. So for this card, I already have the gnome all assembled. It's a little girl gnome wearing some hiking boots holding a camera. And no, it's not a pink camera this time. I have foam dimension on the back. I'll remove the release paper, and since the background of the card is very busy, the gnome would get lost. So I'll add her onto a vellum oval die cut. I'll adhere the gnome onto the vellum piece first, flip it over, put glue on the back, just in the areas behind the gnome. That way the glue doesn't show through on the vellum. For a sentiment, I've already stamped this out. Let the adventure begin. And I stamped it on one of the signed die cut pieces. I have foam dimension on the back. I'll remove the release paper and add it in the upper left-hand corner. Then to finish off the card, I'll use some more Doodlebug shape sprinkles, using 3 different colors of hearts. Put 2 underneath the sentiment and 3 in the lower right-hand corner. And I'll also add a pink flower on the gnome's hat. So there is my finished card, and I did make 2 using this design. I love how this card turned out. The new camera image is definitely my favorite. Now here's another look at the 12 cards plus the 1 craft room decoration I made using Jaded Blossom's August 2023 release. It's all about the great outdoors and fishing. If you are interested in any of the products I used in this video, I do have links provided in the description box below. And don't forget to grab a couple of the skin tone paper pads now that Jaded Blossom stocks them. They're very useful to have when you're making your gnomes. I love using Jaded Blossom's products. Their stamps, dies, and stencils are all made here in the US. Plus, I consider them a local company since they're in the state right next door to me. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.